Riot just massively nerfed Skye, which could affect the entire Valorant meta. So we're going to go through every map. I want to just quickly explain how I'm thinking about these tiers because I'm looking at the agents in the class specifically. An S tier agent is an agent that is essentially a must pick or as close to a must pick on a map as possible. A tier means that it's a very good option and maybe has just a little bit of experimentation that needs to be done, or is just a good sort of like alternative option to the S tier. B tier is an agent that probably needs to be cooked a little bit more, might take a little bit more work to actually fit into a comp. And C tier is sort of like a last ditch effort where maybe you have a teammate who can't play anything else, and so you put them on this agent. And then trash is basically just like, do not play this agent on the map. It doesn't fit the style of the map. So we're going to start on Ascent, and we're going to go through every map in alphabetical order. And we're going to start with Sova. And Sova is sort of just the quintessential initiator on Ascent. He's been part of the Ascent comp for like 2 years now, the most popular comp, arguably, according to basically everybody, the best comp. And I think I can't really argue with that. It's probably Sova's best map in the entire pool, and aside from maybe like Haven. And so I think I have to just put Sova in the S tier. The Skye nerf didn't really do anything to the agent pool in this map particularly. And so I think Sova just does everything that he's always done very, very well. And actually, we're even starting to see a little bit of a shift towards Cypher being played on Ascent. There's some very good trips on A site, for example. And so Sova's value just goes up a little bit more. And in that same vein, we're also going to go ahead and put KO in the S tier. Again, part of the default Ascent comp. Everybody knows why KO is good. He's got the knife for A main. He's got the flashes to support teammates. He's got the ability to turn off enemy sentinel utility. He can help his team enter. He can help defend. And he just does a lot of everything very, very well on the map. So moving on to Skye, the newly nerfed agent. She was never really that relevant on Ascent. I think we saw a bit of her like a year and a half ago. Maybe DRX experimented with her a bit in some other teams. But unless we were to shift to sort of like a Harbor Viper type of comp on this map, she probably wasn't going to see a ton of play anyway. And while I don't think that she's awful, I do think that she's just kind of like okay. Her drone is certainly worse than Sova's on this map. Her flashes are decent, but especially with the new flash nerf where she doesn't regenerate them, you're not really using them for information. And so with that being said, I don't think that she's terrible, so I'm not going to put her in trash. And I'm not even going to put her in C because I think she is like a viable agent, but she's just not that good. So she's going to go in the bottom of B tier actually. And the reason that she's going there is because I think Gecko maybe one-ups her a little bit, just because he gives a little bit more of a different style of play. You know, this is sort of like a speculative B tier for Gecko, and it's maybe a little bit weird. I'm going to try and explain myself as best as possible. But I think that Ascent is one of those maps where you tend to kind of play it in two phases a lot for the attack, where you take B main, you take A main, and then oftentimes you get smoked off and there's a lot of stalling utility that comes in response to taking one of those mains, which means that you can't actually accelerate into the site very well. And that's a perfect opportunity for an agent like Gecko to pick up his utility and then reset the round. So it's almost like the other team is helping you use Gecko more effectively because you take A or B main with the Dizzy and the Wingman, and then you get smoked off, which now protects you from the enemy team so that you can pick up your utility, and then you can use it again once or even, twice or maybe even 3 times again for the rest of the round. And I think overall, one of the interesting things that I could consider on this map is some sort of like wingman plant on A dice or in the front part of A site, where you don't even have to really go clear the back site, and you can kind of just play for countering players that are up in heaven or hell, and not really having to expose yourself to like the spam angles through tree. And so I think there's some potential there. It's obviously kind of an uncooked idea, but I think it's something that could work in the future. Okay, moving on to the next and final 2 agents that we're going to talk about. I'm going to go ahead and talk about Fade. And so Fade for me is an agent that was always pretty good on this map. He was sort of used on this map in great quantities back in the day when she was really strong, when the prowlers were super broken, when the eye was better, when all of her abilities were a little bit stronger. She's just been kind of nerfed several times. She got the Skye treatment about a year ago. And so as a result, she's kind of fallen out of the meta and everybody's just gone back to the Sova. And while I don't know if she was ever quite as good as Sova, I think she did offer quite a bit. And as a result, I still think that she is a reasonably good agent. You know, she doesn't necessarily pair super well with like the Jet, but if you were to move towards a Raze, for example, or some of the other options, she could become even more effective on Ascent. So I think I'm going to put Fade in the A tier. And I think, you know, having the recon wall hack with the eye, having the prowlers to check the 50/50s is just very valuable. I think that her ultimate is quite good, at least for executing onto A and B site. It's probably a little bit lower value than some of the other agents, but she's just a good all-around agent. And if you're looking for something else to play besides the Sova, she's kind of like the next best thing. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and put Breach above Fade. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I think that Breach enables a little bit more of a different play style that's more interesting and potentially has more cool things that you can do, because Breach is really good at contesting the mains. And right now, the main way that you can test the mains is with the Sova Recon Dart and an Odin spam in B, and with the KO Knife and the Omen one way in A. But Breach can do either of those two mains by himself with a single stun, and he can set up his teammates like a Chamber or a Jet on the op lines very easily. And in fact, the Breach stun is so long that you can actually stun all the way from like tree into main. Obviously you can't really see this very well. Oh god. Mistakes are being made. Let's go do this. So Breach's stun is actually so long that you can be standing here and you can actually stun all the way into lane off of maybe Sentinel utility contact, or even just, you know, somebody spotting. So the agent has the ability to help his teammates out from a very long ways away, and I think that that is quite useful. The flashes help you execute into sites, but really the biggest thing is the fault line stuns at the very beginning of the rounds to stop pressure into the mains is just so good that I think a comp like maybe a Breach Fade could potentially give you the ability to compete with a KO Sova if you just play it a little bit differently. So again, KO Sova, I mean, there's a reason that they're in the S tier, but I do think that both Breach and Fade are, you know, decent alternatives if you wanted to try to break free of the current meta a little bit. Okay, so moving on to Bind. This is one of the maps that's hardest hit with the Skye nerfs because she has been the initiator. She's been the one that everybody plays. You put your Skye in B long, you flash Fountain, and then if there's nobody there, you dog through the teleporter and you check outside of showers. And then a little bit later, you flash for Fountain again, and then you just keep regenerating your flashes and flashing Fountain for information, and then eventually you go fight with your team. Unfortunately, she can't do that anymore. And so that means that if you want information at the beginning of the round, if you're going to burn that flash, you need to be getting something for it. And so I think a lot of people are going to be turned off from playing Skye on this map just because of that. But I think that's maybe incorrect. I think that probably what should happen is if you want to play Skye, which I think you still can, you need to be taking space with that first flash. So for example, you could flash a Jet or something like that onto a line where they're able to kind of walk up here and then sit on this line watching this with like an operator. And that might give you some value from that initial flash, and then Skye can rotate somewhere else, or potentially, you know, play over here and play with that operator and give up hookah, for example. So I think there's still options to work with Skye, and she just is a very good agent on this map because you want the flashes to be able to execute on the site. Her dog is very good at clearing hookah and lamps and showers. and the ability to, help your teammates through showers and through the teleporter is super good. So I'm not gonna sell Skye on bind yet. I'm gonna put her in the A tier. She was the S tier agent, the only one I would say prior to the patch. I think she's still an A tier agent. I think she's still gonna see play. It's gonna be very hard to move away from her. But I think she's kind of at an equal level as some of these other agents. We're gonna go to Sova next, and Sova is an interesting one because bind has never really been a historical Sova map. It's kind of an awkward map for some of his dart stuff. The teleporters are kind of like a weird wrinkle for a Sova to play around. Usually you think of Sova as like, he throws out a recon dart at the beginning of the round. It helps one of his teammates, take space early on. He rotates somewhere else. Usually there's some like good spam lines for Sova. The shock darts can maybe be used to get some chip damage and some tight chokes. And actually, some of that is relevant on bind. It's maybe a little bit unexplored. And to be honest, we do see quite a bit of Viper played on bind, and we know that Sova plus Viper can be an interesting combination as well. So it is possible that we'll see some Sova experimentation now that Skye is getting a little bit of a boot out of the top spot. Having a drone to clear angles is good. And even though the range is not great on the drone, it could still be a useful tool. As a result, I'm going to put Sova in B tier because I think, again, it's one of those things where it could work, but it probably needs maybe a specific comp to work with him. But I wouldn't say that he's terrible on this map. On the other hand, I'm going to put Breach as close to the trash tier as possible because here's the thing. I know that people have this sort of nostalgia factor of like, yes, Breach was played by Paper X with their Yoru. It was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in professional Valorant. But I'm going to be honest, outside of Breach enabling Yoru coming out of his teleport and like stunning and killing people, he's just not very good on this map. The thing about Breach is that you want to use the stun to basically like deny a main area and keep the enemies away from getting close to the place where they want to execute. And the stun lines for Breach are just not very good on this map. So for example, if you wanted to deny showers and you're standing here, your stun line is just kind of like this, and it's not really going to hit anything. You could maybe stun like this. Again, they probably can beat that. You could maybe play something like here instead and then try and counter stun once they get into showers. But it's a little bit awkward. And same thing goes for short. Oftentimes it's just a Viper lurking up behind their own utility, and so the Breach stun doesn't really have a good timing to use. And long, there's just really no good places to stun either. I guess you could maybe like stun something like this and then have somebody run out here and take an operator line or something like that, but it's just an awkward map for Breach to be used on, and so I'm just going to put him in the C tier and move on. Let's talk about Fade for a second, because I think that Fade is a very, very good alternative to Skye on this map at this point. We've seen Fade played on this map in the past. She has sort of a similar method of clearing angles to Skye, with the Prowlers being able to get into showers, get into lamps, get into hookah. Obviously, the range on the Prowlers being shorter is a problem to some extent, and so you need to be a little bit closer, a little bit more in dangerous positions to get the same sort of clearing that you would from a Skydog. But that combined with the recon from the eye, I think is quite good. She also pairs very well with Raze, who is obviously like 100% pick rate agent on this map. And that alone might be enough to kind of bump her ahead of Skye. I'm not quite ready to do that, but I could see potentially by the end of the season, Fade being like the highest picked initiator on this map. Gecko is another interesting option. Gecko, I'm going to go ahead and put into B tier with the potential to maybe move up into A tier. I think that this is an agent who, he has this Boombot type ability that obviously Raze's Boombot was hugely valued for a long time on this map. He has some post-plant molly utility. He has the ability to, do these plants from weird places. Like, for example, if you're in hookah, but you don't actually want to jump out because you want to keep hookah, you could maybe just wingman plant from hookah to a fairly protected corner on the front of B site, or from A short into a fairly protected place and like truck on A. So I think that Gecko has some real viability that needs to be explored. And again, this is one of those maps that can kind of be seen as a little bit of a two-phase map. Oftentimes you're taking an initial fight to get into showers, and then you get stalled out by a smoke here. And so you could pick up your utility, and then you could, re-hit afterwards. Same type of thing going into hookah. You get into here, you pick up your utility, and then you re-clear somewhere else, or you re-hit afterwards. So I think that Gecko could also move up as the season progresses. And let's go ahead and just talk about KO real quick, because this is sort of my sleeper agent on this map. I'm tempted to actually put him as like the best agent on the map, but I'm going to put him below Fade just for now. I'm very high on KO, and the reason for that is because, number one, Cypher and Viper are played on this map constantly, and KO is the only agent in the game that can suppress people with very good regularity. The 0 point and the null command are incredible. They have huge ranges. They're very easy to hit on these agents that are primarily used on this map to stall the attack from getting into sight. And so KO enables that in a big way. He's got a lot of very good flashes to enable teammates, like a raise to pop over the top of A with double satchels. And he also has an info tool, which is something that, obviously, if you'll notice, the top 3 agents all have sort of like a consistent, well, formerly regenerative, now without Skye's flash regenerating, not regenerative for all of them, but Fade has a regenerative info tool, KO does, and then obviously Skye has a lot of information as well. So moving on to Breeze. Had some changes, and those changes are definitely going to impact the meta on what is played, and very likely it's going to just bring the meta all the way back to 2021 or whenever this was sort of a mainstay in the map pool before. So right off the bat, we're just going to go ahead and throw KO and Sova in the S tier. And that might seem kind of boring, KO, Sova, Viper, Cypher, and Jet. That's the comp. We're going to see that a lot this year, I think. And the main reason for that, I don't want to put Sova in the S tier. I really, really don't, because I think that the drone nerf to the range and the recon pings only twice significantly hurts his potential on this map. The drone used to be so useful for clearing like deep into B, and the recon was such a reliable tool for getting information in middle for both attack and defense, and for the executes onto the A and B site. And all of that is still relevant, at least as far as the recon is concerned. But the drone not being able to reach deep into these huge spacious sites is definitely a problem. That being said, because they have reopened halls, we are going to see a continual meta of some sort of trip, whether it's a trademark from Chamber or a tripwire from Cypher. Who knows? Maybe we'll even see Killjoy stuff, but realistically, those are the 2 agents that are going to be played the most in this map. And Sova has shock dart lineups already in place to just kill the Hall's trip. What was being done the last time that this map was being played and these agents were meta is you'd have those trips, and then you just have the counter shock dart to open up the halls, and then the Sova has to float between here and here, back and forth, watching halls, going middle, droning out or darting out, whatever, helping his teammate control the middle of the map. And I think that's going to be exactly what he has to do here. So if they hadn't opened halls, I think we could maybe start moving away from the Sova a little bit. But now that he is sort of like mandatory because of the halls being opened, he's back in the S tier. So a little unlucky. The A tier agent that I'm going to place is actually going to be Breach. And this might be a little surprising, but I think that Breach is very, very strong in this map. And the reason for that is because this is a map where the mains have now really been constricted with the change to caves in particular, where a single Breach stun right off the bat is going to deny any entry towards this orb, and maybe even allow you to just fully deny the entirety of A main with a smoke, for example. And that's going to force people to just kind of go into middle and go into halls and favor towards B site, which is really, really good. And also, if you go to B site, for example, and you play the breach right here and you stun, you can also then run your operator player onto this line and take all of elbow and all of the B main line as well. And so I think that breach is kind of in a spot where obviously he's going to have a hard time contesting these two agents that have a lot of info utility and sort of like versatility on this map. But I think if you wanted to run something a little different, the breach has some really, really good options and enables some very good utility plays. And also, if we think about the meta before they reopened halls, there was a lot of Yoru being played, and we know that breach pairs quite well with the Yoru. So if some teams don't want to just go back to like stock standard boring stuff, and they want to continue exploring the Yoru stuff, maybe breach is a good option for that. Moving on, let's go ahead and go to the trash tier. I finally have a trash tier agent, and that's Fade. Fade just does not fit this map. It is way too big. It is way too wide open. The Prowlers are going to clear absolutely nothing before they time out, and her eye is going to see absolutely nothing when you throw it out. And then the C's, I mean, the C's could be okay, but the ultimate doesn't even clear the entire sites. And so she really has very low utility, and there's essentially no reason to play Fade on Breeze. Moving on to our C tier agent, we've got Skye. And Skye was an agent that we would see kind of competing for KO sometimes in the standard comp. It would be either the Jet Cypher, Viper, Sova, and then KO, or sometimes it would be a Skye. And now I think with the nerf to the info, this is a map where getting consistent info is really important. And so you're probably always going to throw out a flash if you're playing the Skye to find information. And then if you don't have more flashes to continue to check for information, you're not in a very good spot. And especially because this map often has the need to pop flash through stuff, you're gonna have to be really, really careful with when you use those flashes for information, which means you are probably just gonna not be able to play Skye to like the best of her ability. So I'm gonna put her in C tier. And our last agent is Gecko, who is going to go into the B tier, which is maybe a little bit of me just kind of like fanboying Gecko at this point. But I do think that there's some options here. I think that Gecko has some real maybe post-plant potential. Like if some teams were to come up with a post-plant meta where you can just plant with Wingman from far away, this is one of the maps where we've seen teams like DRX really favor just like getting the spike down quickly with like a dash in with a jet onto B, planting the spike, you know, dash in here, plant the spike, and then everybody is just playing post-plant lineups from way, way, way back. And so I could see something like that potentially happening with Gecko, where Gecko plants with Wingman. You know, the site is so big, and both of the plant spots are kind of well protected from spam in a lot of cases, that the Wingman plant might be really good. Also, this is a map where there can be a bit of the sort of like two-phase type thing, at least in the middle part of the map, where maybe you want to use the Gecko utility to kind of like work your way up elbow and then pick it up, or work your way up into middle and then pick it up. And I mean, I'm going to be honest, primarily I'm thinking about post-plant and cringiness. But so moving on to Icebox, again, unfortunately, we're kind of in a spot where it's like, well, there's a pretty established meta already. And that meta has always been Sova, and it's hard to deny why. The Sova's control of middle is so important to counter the Viper Orb that gets placed here all the time. You know, Viper Orb, okay, you dart up here to see if Viper's crossed. And I think that's going to continue to happen because the Viper Orb is potentially even more important now with this ability to get up into window and then fire down into defender's spawn. So I think Sova's probably going to see a lot of play, just playing around boiler like he always has been, playing for, you know, the shock dart and potential molly kills with Viper to deny the plant, and post-plant stuff with the Hunter's Fury as well. Obviously the drone nerf does hurt him a bit, but the ability to fly over stuff with the drone is just too valuable to pass up on the A site, and even on the B site it gets a huge amount of value. So I think Sov is pretty safely in the S tier here. Let's move on to some other maybe a little bit more interesting agents. Let's talk about Gecko. Gecko, I'm going to go ahead and throw in the A tier. And the reason for this is, you guessed it once again, the wingman plant. And that might seem a little bit sort of like gimmicky or a little bit more of a meme, but remember that this is the worst plant site in the entire game. B site is an absolute nightmare for the attackers to plant on. We've, devolved into using a sage wall every single round. Sage walls, runs in and plants. Sage walls, runs in and plants and dies. Sage walls, runs in and plants and dies. That's just all anyone ever did on this map, and they didn't really change the site very much. That's basically still going to be what has to happen unless you use a wingman. And so let's say you have a Viper wall like this, and then you can just throw your wingman out here and just hope for the best. Maybe you get the plant down, maybe you don't. You could have the Viper wall go here. You could make your way to yellow, throw the wingman plant to there, and again, hope for the best. At least you're not risking your sage and your 400 credit wall to get the spike down. And honestly, who knows? Maybe you'll see more success that way. Also, I will say that being able to throw Dizzy up and over stuff like, the early part of A main, up over 410, into the back of site. There's lots of places where the Dizzy can actually get a lot of value, chasing the operator off of this line, for example, where they're playing up on generator. The Dizzy will clear that, and then you can pick up the Dizzy in a safe spot and then come up here and then throw the Dizzy in again. And I think that the reusable utility on Icebox could be very, very good for Gecko. Moving on to another sort of controversial agent on this map is going to be the Fade. So we've seen a bit of Fade played here. I think it was FPX with Angel playing Fade a lot for a while. She just doesn't quite have the same range as Sova, in my opinion. And the Prowlers, while they are good at clearing some parts of A, I think the nerf to their range and the nerf to their health is going to make them way worse than she was last time. And so the fact that her abilities just don't go quite far enough on a map like this is going to make her quite a bit less effective than she was in the past. Obviously, some of her like seize combos could be good for denying orbs and stuff, but I just don't see a ton of Fade value when you could just play a Sova instead. Let's talk about the worst agent on this map. And for me, that's Breach. This might be a little controversial because people might be like, well, you could probably play Breach. But again, I'm looking at stuff like fault line lines of consistent stun value. There's kind of a lot of stuff in the way for the flashes to be good on places like A. There's not a lot of really good places to flash off of on B. And the Rolling Thunder is going to get some value, but honestly, it's probably not going to get a ton just based on, especially if you're executing on a place like B where people can play like way back in Snowman or like behind. I just don't see a ton of value from the Breach. And I think I would rather play every other agent in this category instead of him. Let's move on to KO, who rounds out our S tier. I mean, this is sort of like the meta. We've actually been seeing a little bit less KO played recently. It's been Reyna instead. And to me, that just kind of is like, why? That was always my impression in the past when there was sort of a tendency to play Reyna early on, like First Strike in the early patches when KO first came out. Like, well, you need another flasher. You want somebody who can kind of go in aggressively. Reyna or KO? I guess you can play Reyna, but KO seems to kind of fill that niche, but maybe also be useful for the team. I think KO is very good on this map. Null Command is really good at shutting off Viper stuff. Obviously, the knife is good for regenerative information. The flashes are good. I think there's just everything that KO does is useful for Icebox. And our last agent is going to be Skye. We're throwing Skye in the C tier. She's playable, but you're looking for other options like most of the time. You know, her flashes are just, they're fine. She's basically here because the flashes are fine and the dog is decent for clearing some close corners. But other than that, you could find a lot more value from the other agents. All right, so Lotus is another interesting one because Skye has been getting played on Lotus a lot. There's sort of been two comps, right? You've got the Fnatic comp with the Fade, and then you have the Fnatic comp, but subbing in the Skye because people wanted the flashes. But really, it's been one comp with either a Skye or a Fade that's been played by the vast majority of people for at least the last sort of half of the season of last year, and likely going into this year as well. It's mostly what we've been seeing is people playing the Fnatic comp, but with a Skye. I think this map might be the least hurt by the nerfs to Skye, and that's where we're going to start, is talking about Skye. I think that in most cases, you're not really using the Skye flash for information. Sometimes you're using it for information on C. You're flashing out here to check for information and then rotating. But most of the time, I feel like the Skye is being played to fight on A. And remember, when we were talking about bind, I think the biggest change that teams are going to have to make is if they're going to use this flash for information, they need to be using it for information to take space. And actually, that is kind of the play style of Lotus, where you're using this flash to enable your teammates to come out here and take rubble, and then you're rotating off. And you're not really kind of going to check for more information elsewhere with your flashes. You're just using your flash to fight. And so because of that, I think that Skye is still a totally viable agent on this map, and still probably one of the best agents on this map. So I'm going to put her in A tier. The next one that we're going to talk about is Breach. Breach had quite a bit of hype early on this map because he was really good at shutting down this A play. You know, you'd stand here and you just stun here, and you could kind of like slow down this A take. And while that is still pretty good, we've seen sort of a move away from like the Breach neon stuff. Honestly, I don't know particularly. Let me rephrase. I know why. It's because we're playing double controller, and Breach's flashes don't work that well with double controller with the Viper wall. There's also not a lot of really good flashes when you're executing onto places like C and B. There's a lot of places where the enemies can just kind of like tuck and dodge the flashes, and so he's not quite as high value as he is on some of the other maps. I think that the fault line stuns are really good on this map. You know, we've got something like this, we've got a stun like this, we've got a stun like this, we got a stun like this. All of these are really, really good, but the rest of Breach's kit just doesn't get quite as much value on this map as on some of the other ones. And info is really important on a 3-site map, just because you kind of need to be able to gamble stack. And unlike Haven, where a Breach stun can help you turn a specific part of the map into a single lane, you know, you're taking A main and turning it from having a short and a long part of A into just one line on A with the Breach stun. And it doesn't really happen on this map very well. So I think Breach is, you know, he's playable, but he's going to go into B tier. I think I'd rather play several other agents ahead of him. And one of those agents is actually going to be KO. KO is going to go into the A tier for me. And the reason for this is because I think he could be a decent sort of flex away from the Skye. Now, I know the dog is very important because, you know, there's a lot of 50-50s to check. You gotta check here, you gotta check like this, you gotta check into here. So KO maybe doesn't have that part of the kit, but he does have good informational utility, and he has a good kind of like shutdown piece of utility with the 0 point to be able to stop Viper from getting out of here. Being able to turn off Viper's stuff, being able to turn off Cypher's stuff, being able to turn off KJ's stuff is really good on this map, because remember, they're relying super heavily on Sentinel utility to hold one of the sites most of the time, because it's 3 sites, so they can stack somewhere else. So if you can turn off a Cypher, if you can turn off a Killjoy, oftentimes you're going to have a free site. And on top of that, if we're playing double controller, pop flashes from KO are very, very good. So I see a lot of value from KO. Maybe not quite as much as the Skye, maybe not quite as much as one more other agent that we'll talk about, but I definitely think that he's a very good agent that probably should be explored a little bit more. The next agent that we're going to talk about is Gecko. And Gecko, I think, was one of those agents that a lot of people thought might be really good on this map early on. And I was one of those people, honestly. I thought that being able to like plant from long range onto C seemed pretty good. I thought there was a lot of like fighting for early C control, picking up your stuff, going back A, re-clearing A, picking up your stuff. It seems like a pretty good Gecko map. However, at this point, I think I would much rather play, a Skye that has a dog that you can control to check all these 50-50 angles. I think I would rather play probably even a KO. Maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh on Gecko. The thing about this one is I feel like Lotus is still fairly wide open in terms of what you could play as far as initiators go, because I think all of them are pretty good. So I'm going to put Gecko in B tier, but that's with the caveat of saying that realistically, I think that all of these agents are like fairly close to the same tier, with maybe the exception of Fade being the best one. And Fade is going to go into the A tier as the top of the A tier, simply because he's part of the Fnatic comp that didn't lose last year basically at all. And now the only other competition that we saw to her was the Skye all of last year, and now Skye's been nerfed. So I think Fade is sort of like maybe a step above everything else right now, at least in terms of agent like comfort and what people know. But I do think that this A and B tier is like maybe kind of one big A-B tier, and all of these agents are potentially viable, including Sova, who I'm going to put at the top or at the very bottom of A tier. And honestly, I think I'm gonna change that. I'm gonna put him in B tier, and he's gonna be just kind of like in here in a random spot, because I think Sova he's good. Like the dart is good. The drone is good. Hunter's Fury is good. We're playing Viper a lot, so shock mollies are good. Realistically, I feel like any of these agents could be played, and I kind of hope that we see a little bit more experimentation, especially if teams are going away from playing a Skye, and that forces them to go away from the double controller. Maybe we'll see a little bit more of like a Sova or a Breach come into the meta, but maybe not. Split is an interesting map with the new Skye nerf, because she was really becoming like the most prevalent initiator on this map, and had been for a while. Obviously, the ability to check for information outside of A, check for information inside B, check for information in middle, dog your teammates into middle, dog your teammates into the site, all of that was really good. I feel like is going to probably suffer quite a bit on this map, because it was one of the maps where checking for information was kind of the main use of the flash, at least for part of the round, which means that you really, really have to be efficient with that. And you're not really going to be able to recheck again, because you're going to need those flashes to maybe fight for a retake, or, just fight in general. So I think that Skye is going to suffer, but I also think that she was so good on this map that it's going to be really, really hard to replace her. So with all that being said, I think she's still probably an A tier agent on Split. I think that the attack side of her map probably doesn't matter that much, because a lot of the time when you use a flash, like for example, to check if anybody's in mail, you're also sending a raise up middle. So you're using that flash to actually take space. And therefore, even though you're now down to one flash, at least you've gotten something for that. And so it's not quite just like throwing a flash for info and not getting anything is ruinous at this point. So I think she's still probably a pretty good agent. Now, I think we can all agree that this map is pretty awkward for Sova. And so we're just going to put Sova in C tier. I don't want to put him in trash tier, because I'm kind of a believer in the weird stuff. Maybe there's a way for Sova to be decent on this map. I don't really have a whole lot of reasoning for that, other than the fact that, I'm sure that there's some lineups that are decent, and like the recons seem like they could be okay, and the drone out of B main and like up into heaven seems like it could be okay. I'm probably looking for any other agent than Sova, but I don't want to put him in absolute trash tier on this map. Now, moving on, let's talk about Gecko, because Gecko is an interesting one for me. For a moment in time there, when Loud was playing Gecko on the map, I saw the vision. I thought that, oh, okay, this is real. Gecko is good. And that was before Gecko had a significant buff to his efficacy. Now that he can pick up his stuff much faster, I think that Gecko is legitimately good on this map. There is some stuff that Loud was doing, especially stuff like taking Heaven and then planting down onto the default plant spot with Wingman and not giving up Heaven at all. That seems like it could be extremely good. This is another one of those maps where you have sort of like these phases, right? You're taking B main, you get smoked off. You're taking ramps, you get smoked off. You're taking middle, you get smoked off. All of those are good opportunities to pick up your utility, reset, and then go again. And so I think that this map sort of like lends itself for Gecko's style of play and the pace of play. And if you're looking for a flashing agent that has some interesting quirks and does have kind of like a dog-like ability if you can get the ultimate, I think that Gecko is a pretty good option. And I think there might even be quite a few teams who experiment with him on this map in particular, because there's already a little bit of a roadmap of how to do it. So he goes into the A tier. Breach is going into the S tier. And the reason for that is because he's already kind of been a staple of playing this map. Yes, he was played with the Skye a lot of the time, and yes, you probably do want some sort of other info agent with the Breach. But even if you don't have an info agent with the Breach, we were still seeing Breach played by himself on this map because he enables these big explosive plays up ramps, stunning for your raise as you double satchel, you know, stopping the operator on B from keeping you out, or setting up the operator on B. He's got the ability to help teammates from across the map. You can usually stun people going up into Heaven if you're playing in vents, and vice versa from Heaven going to vents. There's just a lot of really, really good stuff that Breach does. His ultimate is incredible on both sites, and the flashes give you the punching power that you need to actually get through the choke points on split, which is like one of the hardest parts of this map. So Breach is going to the S tier, and honestly, he's probably going to get played in a dual initiator comp, I would expect, but I think that he's sort of like the core piece of that comp at this point. Let's talk about Fade. Fade is going to go into the B tier, and the reason that Fade goes to the B tier is just that, you know, the Prowlers are fine for clearing some of these 50-50s, but I feel like she just doesn't really get that far with her utility. Yes, you can clear here, but then you're going to have to use another Prowler to clear here, and you can't really use that Prowler to, you know, clear all the way around just because the range is too short. So you're going to have to use a huge amount of utility to take any amount of space with Fade, and I think it's just a little bit too taxing on her resources as far as the map goes. KO is going to be sort of my sleeper pick for the A tier, along with Gecko. And the reason for this is I've seen some decent cooking on this map from DRX with KO. There's a very, very cool pop flash over the top from back here to ramps that works very, very well. And I think that, again, this is the map where we're seeing a lot of Viper and we're seeing a lot of Cypher being played. And anytime I see those two agents played together, I'm always going to look for KO to find value. You know, if the Viper is playing in middle, they throw the orb up because they want to stun. Let's say you knife them, and now all of a sudden they are suppressed, and suddenly all of that stalling power is not there, and you're able to quickly speed up and kind of mess with the timings of the defense. Also, pop flashes are really good against Viper walls. Viper walls are everywhere. I just think that KO has a lot that you're looking for in terms of the attack power and also the defense power, with the ability to find information, slow down a hit with suppress, and of course, just his overall sort of versatility as an agent. And our last map of the day is Sunset. And this is going to be kind of a weird one because this is obviously the newest map in the pool, and there's sort of a meta that has somewhat settled at this point that is In my opinion, not necessarily the best meta on the map. Like, it's something that works, but I don't necessarily think that it is the optimal way to play. Um, so that is why I don't have any S tier agents. I have 4 agents in A tier and 2 in C tier. And basically, the tiers are like, here's the 4 that I think you should probably experiment with, and here's the 2 that I think need a lot of work. And so let's go ahead and just talk about the C tier right off the bat. The first one is going to be Skye. The reason being is that she was a fine agent on this map before the nerfs, but I think with the nerfs, the lack of being able to sort of like look for information in middle, being able to look for information in the mains is really punishing for her. And her dog actually doesn't get a huge amount of value on this map because the path to the site is kind of long and winding. And so even with its extensive range, it's just not quite as effective as on a lot of other maps. Also, she's just kind of surpassed by a lot of other agents in terms of her ability to fight on this map. And so I'm just going to leave it there. The other agent that I'm going to put in C tier is going to make maybe quite a few people mad, but it's going to be Gecko. Now, I know that there's some teams that are running Gecko, and a lot of people have kind of been maybe swearing by Gecko because of that, but I'm not a believer yet. I just don't really see his efficacy as far as the defensive side goes in particular, because he kind of wants to be moving forward. And this is a map where moving forward gets punished a lot. There's a lot of lurk paths. There's a lot of sort of like defaulting that happens on this map. And I feel like Gecko plays into that style instead of beating that style a lot. I also don't see a huge amount of value from like the wingman plant on this map. I don't really see the best plays for Dizzy. I think maybe the best argument for playing Gecko is his ability to consistently take B main with his utility and then pick it up. But it's not quite the same on the A site. Like, even if you come up here, you're kind of at risk of somebody peeking you here and somebody peeking you here. And because of that, you're never really safe. And the same thing goes for middle. Like, using your utility to take middle is somewhat effective, although there's a lot of sort of like tuck places for people to just dodge your Dizzy and then shoot you. There's no real good place to pick up your utility for Gecko, and so as a result, I think he's probably the worst agent on this map in the initiator category. So let's move on to the ones that I think you should be playing. And honestly, for me, number 1 is hard to decide. So we're gonna just kind of classify all these together. The most popular one is Fade. Now, do I think that Fade is the best agent on this map in the initiator class? Personally, no, but I can see why people do think this. Obviously, the Prowlers are good for just kind of like checking these tight angles, these 50s. There's a lot of them as you're going towards the site, you know, coming into market, Prowler's good. Going up into top middle, Prowler is good. The Eye is high value at when you're executing onto A. Less so on B, but still pretty decent. I think that Fade is kind of an overall solid agent. We're seeing a decent amount of Rays being played as well. So that kind of makes sense. I think she's solid, but I do not think that she's like the optimal, the perfect agent for this map. So let's talk about the other ones. For me, we're going to go ahead and throw AO up there and talk about him next. For me, KO is really good on this map. And the reason for that is just because, again, we've got a lot of Viper, we've got a lot of Cypher, we've got a lot of Rays. All of these agents KO tends to be pretty good against. I think the 0 point is really good at stopping some of these early rushes and also enabling some of these early rushes for the mains. I think his flashes are solid for enabling teammates to take places like elbow. You can flash through the windows right here. You can pop flash, you know, into market. You can flash for your teammates into A. You can throw flashes over the walls. You can throw a flash into tiles from market on the defensive side. I think that there's just quite a bit of sort of like supportive utility options for KO in this map. And so I think that hopefully teams will explore him a bit more. Another agent that I think is quite good is Sova. And I was sort of sold on this by China, to be honest. There was a team that was running a harbor with a Sova, and they would like wall off middle with a dart here every round, and it seemed really good at taking control of that. Obviously, we've talked about sort of how good a drone can be on this map because there's lots of 50-50s. So droning out on B is pretty good. A little bit tougher on A just because there's a lot to clear and your drone range is fairly low. But that combined with the recon, and there are some pretty good recons as well, I think is enough to put Sova in the contention for being a good, viable agent. And then on top of that, we've got this really, really annoying tripwire that Cypher's placing here all the time. So having the ability to shock that and blow this up and enable your team to hit B quickly is really, really high value. So the last agent that we're going to talk about, and this one is sort of, I don't know whether to put him at the top of A or what. I think I'm actually just going to do that. Might surprise some people, but I just think that Breach has a lot of really powerful lines. Again, this character is just all about the lines. What are the good lines? Well, you've got an awesome line on A for the fault line. You've got an awesome line on B for the fault line that can really, really shut down fast hits. And then there's a lot of stuff where you're going to be fighting into middle. You can flash off of this. You can flash through these walls. You can break the Cypher trips with your Aftershock on attack. You can push operators off of lines with the fault line. You can flash for your teammates into elbow. You can flash through the walls onto A. I just think that Breach is really, really versatile in this map. His ultimate goes pretty hard as well. And just overall, he's a very, very good brawler. And we're seeing quite a bit of brawling in these main spaces at the moment. So that is Sunset. That is the tier list for the Initiators. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And we'll see you in the next tier list, which is going to be Duelists.